Greetings, Seekers, and welcome to another Library of Divine Echoes Deep Dive. I'm your host, Christopher Little, and today we embark on a profound journey, one that seeks to bridge the seemingly disparate realms of theology and philosophy of mind. Our focus will be an exploration of the provocative and, dare I say, revolutionary idea that God is synonymous with consciousness. To navigate this intricate landscape, we'll follow a structured path. First, we'll establish a working definition of God for our metaphysical inquiry, moving beyond traditional anthropomorphic conceptions. Second, we'll delve into the nature of consciousness itself, examining its various facets and the philosophical challenges it presents. Third, we'll explore historical and contemporary philosophical arguments that explicitly or implicitly link the divine with consciousness. And fourth, we'll critically examine the implications of such a proposition for our understanding of reality, ethics, and the human condition. Let's begin by addressing the elephant in the room, the term God. For many, this immediately conjures images of an old man in the sky, a benevolent creator, or a judgmental deity. However, for the purposes of our metaphysical investigation, such anthropomorphic conceptions prove to be significant roadblocks. We must strive for a more abstract, more fundamental understanding. Think of the classical philosophical conceptions, Aristotle's unmoved mover, Plotinus's one, Spinoza's substance, or even Hegel's absolute spirit. These are not personal beings in the conventional sense, but rather ultimate principles, groundings of all being. For our episode today, let us consider God not as a being, but as the ultimate ground of being, the fundamental reality from which all else emanates or within which all else subsists. It is the causa sui, the self-caused, the unconditioned condition. This allows us to move beyond the theological dogma and engage with the concept on a purely ontological and epistemological level. Now, let's turn our attention to the other side of our equation, consciousness. What do we mean when we speak of consciousness? This is arguably the most vexing problem in philosophy, the hard problem, as David Chalmers famously termed it. We can identify several key facets of consciousness. Sentience, the capacity to feel or perceive, to have subjective experience, think of pain, pleasure, or the redness of red. Awareness, knowing or perceiving that something exists or is happening. Self-awareness, the ability to recognize oneself as an individual distinct from others and the environment. Qualia, the subjective phenomenal properties of experience, the what is it like aspect. Intentionality, the property of mental states to be about something. They are directed towards objects or states of affairs. Historically, various theories have attempted to explain consciousness. Dualism, the mind and body are distinct substances. For example, Descartes. This leaves us with the interaction problem. Materialism, physicalism. Consciousness is an emergent property of complex brain activity, ultimately reducible to physical processes. This struggles with explaining the qualia and the subjective nature of experience. Idealism. Reality is fundamentally mental or consciousness dependent. For example, Berkeley and some forms of Eastern philosophy. This often feels counterintuitive to our everyday experience of a mind-independent world. Panpsychism, Consciousness is a fundamental and ubiquitous property of the universe, present in varying degrees even in non-organic matter. This is gained renewed interest in contemporary philosophy of mind, often seen as middle ground between materialism and idealism. For our discussion today, it is the more expansive and fundamental interpretations of consciousness that will be most relevant. The idea of a connection between the divine and mind is far from new. While not always explicitly stating God is consciousness, many historical figures laid crucial groundwork. Anaxagoras, 500 to 428 BCE, introduced the concept of nous, mind or intellect, as the ordering principle of the cosmos, setting matter into motion and giving it form. While not a personal God, nous functions as a universal, intelligent force. Plato, 428 to 348 BC. His theory of forms posits an ultimate reality of perfect, eternal, and unchanging forms, which are grasped by the intellect. The form of the good, the highest of these, can be seen as an ultimate principle of order and intelligibility, akin to a divine mind. Plotinus, 204 to 270 CE. The founder of Neoplatonism, Plotinus's hierarchy of reality begins with the One, an ineffable transcendent source from which all reality emanates. The second hypostasis is nous, the divine intellect, which contains the forms. Here, the divine is inherently intellectual and conscious. Spinoza, 1632 to 1677. As many of you know, Spinoza's God or nature is a single infinite self-caused substance with infinite attributes, two of which we can know, thought and extension. For Spinoza, mind and matter are not separate, but two aspects of the same underlying reality. The attribute of thought, in its infinite totality, can be understood as an all-encompassing consciousness. Deus sive natura, God or nature, but for Spinoza, this nature is imbued with an infinite mind. The 18th and 19th centuries saw a significant emphasis on the role of mind in constituting reality, particularly within idealist traditions. George Berkeley, 1685 to 1753, his famous dictum, Esse est percipi, to be is to be perceived, argues that the existence of objects is dependent on their being perceived. To account for the continued existence of objects when no human mind perceives them, Berkeley posits an omnipresent eternal perceiver, God. God's mind constantly perceives everything, thus sustaining reality. Here, God is explicitly identified with an all-encompassing consciousness. German idealism. Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel. While their systems are complex and distinct, they all emphasize the fundamental role of mind or spirit in shaping or constituting reality. Kant, 1724 to 1804, while he posited a mind-independent noumenal world, the phenomenal world, the world as we experience it, is structured by the categories of our understanding. This highlights the mind's active role in shaping reality. Hegel, 1770 to 1831. His absolute idealism posits an absolute spirit or mind that progressively unfolds itself through history and thought. Reality is the self-realization of this absolute spirit. For Hegel, God is not merely conscious, but is consciousness in its ultimate self-actualizing form. In contemporary metaphysics and philosophy of mind, the link between the fundamental nature of reality and consciousness continues to be explored, sometimes with a more scientific flavor. Panpsychism, As mentioned earlier, panpsychism proposes that consciousness, or proto-consciousness, is a fundamental feature of the universe, perhaps even at the quantum level. If consciousness is truly fundamental, then the ultimate ground of being could logically be a form of consciousness. Think of it as a spectrum of consciousness, with simpler forms in elementary particles and highly complex forms in human brains, culminating in an ultimate, all-encompassing consciousness. Integrated information theory, Giulio Tononi. While primarily a theory of what consciousness is and how it arises in physical systems, IIT posits that consciousness is a measure of integrated information. While not explicitly theological, if reality itself is fundamentally informational and consciousness is about the integration of information, one could speculate about an ultimate, maximally integrated information system as a form of divine consciousness. Quantum consciousness, Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. This highly speculative hypothesis suggests that consciousness arises from quantum phenomena in the microtubules of neurons. While controversial, if consciousness is indeed rooted in the fundamental fabric of reality at the quantum level, it lends itself to the idea of a universal, underlying consciousness. Let's synthesize these strands into a more direct argument for God as consciousness. 1. The priority of consciousness. If consciousness is not merely an emergent property of complex matter, but is instead a fundamental aspect of reality, perhaps even more fundamental than matter itself, as idealism suggests or panpsychism implies, then it becomes a strong candidate for the ultimate ground of being. 2. The explanatory power of consciousness. If God is understood as the ground of all existence, and consciousness is the most profound and irreducible aspect of our experience, then identifying God with consciousness offers an explanation for the very possibility of experience, meaning, and subjective reality. Where else do these arise from if not from a conscious ground? 3. The problem of existence and sustenance. If the universe had a beginning, what was the state before physical reality? Could it have been pure potentiality held within an infinite consciousness? And what sustains existence at every moment? If reality is fundamentally perceived or known, then a universal perceiver or knower could be the ultimate sustainer. 4. The teleological argument reimagined. Instead of design by a craftsman god, consider the inherent order, beauty, and intelligibility of the cosmos. Could this intelligibility be a reflection of an immanent self-organizing consciousness that is the universe itself? The laws of nature would then not be external decrees, but expressions of this inherent consciousness. 5. The mystical and contemplative traditions. Across diverse spiritual traditions, profound mystical experiences often describe an encounter with a universal, unifying consciousness that is perceived as divine. These experiences, while subjective, offer a consistent narrative that aligns with our proposition. Think of Advaita Vedanta's Brahman, often described as pure consciousness, or the concept of the mind of God in various spiritual philosophies. If we accept, even hypothetically, that God is synonymous with consciousness, what are the implications for our metaphysical understanding? Ontology. No creation ex nihilo in the traditional sense. Instead of a separate creator bringing matter into existence, reality might be understood as an emanation of self-unfolding or an internal modification of this fundamental consciousness. The universe is not made by consciousness, but is consciousness. The universe is a living conscious entity. Rather than a collection of inert particles, the cosmos becomes imbued with a form of life, sentience, or awareness at its most fundamental level. This resonates with ancient animistic and pantheistic worldviews, but grounded in a sophisticated understanding of consciousness. The problem of evil. If God is consciousness, how do we account for suffering and evil? This becomes a profound internal problem for consciousness itself. Is it a limitation within the process of self-unfolding, or a necessary aspect of its experience and evolution? This would necessitate a reevaluation of teleology and the nature of conscious growth. Epistemology. Direct knowledge of God. If God is consciousness and we are conscious beings, then our own consciousness becomes a direct portal to understanding the divine. Introspection, meditation, and deep contemplative practices could be seen as methods of directly experiencing this ultimate reality, rather than merely apprehending it through dogma or external revelation. The universe as knowable. The very intelligibility of the universe, its adherence to discoverable laws, can be seen as a reflection of its conscious nature. It is knowable because it is, in some sense, a manifestation of knowing. The implications extend beyond abstract ontology to our lived experience. Ethical frameworks. Intrinsic value of all consciousness. If all reality is ultimately a manifestation of divine consciousness, then every conscious being, from the simplest to the most complex, possesses intrinsic value. This could ground a robust ethic of compassion, environmental stewardship, and respect for all forms of life. Hurting another sentient being would be, in a profound sense, harming an aspect of the divine self. The Golden Rule reimagined. Treat others as you would wish to be treated, not just out of empathy, but because there is ultimately no other. The boundaries between individual consciousnesses become permeable at the deepest level. Purpose and meaning. Our individual lives gain profound meaning as integral parts of this unfolding universal consciousness. Our experiences, our suffering, our joy, our learning, all contribute to the totality of this divine consciousness's self-understanding. The human condition. The self as a fragment of the divine. Our individual consciousness is not merely an isolated phenomenon, but a localized expression or particular wavelength of the ultimate universal consciousness. This offers a powerful sense of connection and belonging. The path to enlightenment and self-realization. Spiritual paths that seek to transcend the ego and realize a deeper connection with a universal self can be reinterpreted as a process of aligning individual consciousness with the ultimate divine consciousness. Death and immortality. If consciousness is fundamental, then death might not be an annihilation, but a transformation, a reintegration into the larger conscious field. The immortality of the soul would be recast as the persistence of consciousness, perhaps in a non-individualized form. Of course, no profound philosophical proposition is without its challenges. Let's address some immediate criticisms. Vagueness. The concept of universal consciousness can be seen as overly vague or lacking empirical grounding. How do we measure or detect it? Pan-consciousness fallacy. Does positing consciousness everywhere dilute the meaning of consciousness itself? If a rock is conscious, is our consciousness truly special? This often comes down to differing definitions of consciousness. The problem of evil revisited. As mentioned, this is a significant hurdle. If the ultimate reality is conscious and it includes all experience, how can it encompass suffering and apparent nihilism? Does it imply a flawed or learning consciousness? Testability. How can this hypothesis be empirically tested? Metaphysics, by its nature, often transcends empirical verification, but this is still a valid concern for many. Anthropomorphism in disguise? Is identifying God with consciousness just another way of projecting human attributes onto the ultimate reality, albeit more abstractly? Loss of personal God. For those who find solace in a personal, relational God, this concept might feel cold or impersonal. Despite these challenges, the proposition that God is synonymous with consciousness offers a compelling and coherent metaphysical framework. It provides a way to reconcile scientific understandings of the universe with spiritual and mystical insights, offer a profound sense of meaning and interconnectedness, ground ethical principles in the very fabric of reality, provide a new lens through which to understand the perennial questions of existence, purpose, and the nature of the divine. It encourages us to look not just outward to the cosmos, but inward to the depths of our own experience. For in understanding consciousness, we may be glimpsing the ultimate nature of reality itself. This is not merely a theological assertion, but a rigorous metaphysical inquiry that demands our most critical and imaginative engagement. As we draw this deep dive to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on the expansive territory we've covered. We started by reconceptualizing God, moving beyond anthropomorphic images to consider an ultimate ground of being. Then we unpacked the enigma of consciousness, exploring its various facets from sentience to intentionality, and briefly touched upon the diverse theories attempting to explain it. We journeyed through history, seeing glimmers of the divine mind in the nous of Anaxagoras, Plato's forms, Plotinus's divine intellect, and Spinoza's infinite attribute of thought. We then witnessed the idealist turn, where thinkers like Berkeley explicitly identified God with an all-encompassing consciousness, and the German idealists like Hegel saw reality as the unfolding of the absolute spirit. Finally, we looked at modern metaphysics, where ideas like panpsychism and even quantum consciousness hint at a fundamental, universal awareness. The argument for God as consciousness synthesizes these ideas, suggesting that consciousness's priority, explanatory power, and ability to sustain existence point to it as the ultimate reality. This led us to profound implications for ontology and epistemology, where the universe might be seen as a living, conscious entity, and our own consciousness as a direct portal to the divine. On a more personal level, we explored the ethical frameworks and the reinterpretation of the human condition, where every conscious being holds intrinsic value and our individual selves are fragments of the divine. Of course, we also squarely faced the challenges and criticisms, acknowledging the vagueness, the pan-consciousness fallacy, the perennial problem of evil, and the difficulty of empirical testability. These are not minor issues, but rather invitations for further, deeper philosophical inquiry. Ultimately, the idea of Deus ex conscientia, God as consciousness, offers a compelling and profound lens through which to view existence. It's a framework that seeks to bridge science and spirituality, imbue life with meaning, and ground our ethics in the very fabric of reality. It invites us not only to ponder the vastness of the cosmos, but also to look inward, recognizing that the very act of conscious experience might be our most direct connection to the ultimate nature of everything. Thank you for joining me on this profound journey into the Library of Divine Echoes. Your engagement and thoughtful attention are truly appreciated. I encourage you to continue pondering these ideas and exploring the connections between the divine and consciousness in your own reflections. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep exploring the depths of reality.